The late astronomer and well-known advocate of scientific thought, Carl Sagan's famed PBS series Cosmos, once invited the question: if we were visited by a superior species from another part of the galaxy, and forced to explain to them our stewardship of our planet, not to mention the state of human affairs today, would we be proud of what we described? How would we frame our explanation of how almost half of the world, over 3 billion people, are either barely surviving in abject poverty and sickness, or are simply dying off unnecessarily at a rate of about one person every couple of seconds, all occurring in the wake of an advanced technological reality where we could easily feed, clothe, and house every family on Earth in a respectable standard of living? How would we frame the global warfare, 230 million killed by their fellow man in the past 100 years alone? Based on what? Meaningless territoriality, resources, dogmatic, obsolete ideologies? Again, this all occurring in the shadows of a looming scientific recognition that we are indeed simply one family, sharing one household, bound by the exact same laws of nature, and hence the same unifying operational ideology. How about our economic system? The bedrock of what defines our society, not to mention our dominant motivations. How would we explain the reality that rather than organizing ourselves efficiently as a single system to properly manage this household we share, we childishly divide and compete and exploit each other through an archaic, completely environmentally decoupled game? A game, by the way, which not only appears to perpetuate a vast spectrum of social atrocities, but now seems to be further destabilizing society, decreasing our public health. Sorry to say, as an individual, I really don't care what you believe, nor do I particularly respect it. Why? Because I don't really respect what I believe either. There's no evidence to show that any of the traditional values, establishments, or social structures, common practices we have today will be relevant tomorrow. The only thing that appears to stand the test of time is this very notion of change, the ever-evolving understanding of ourselves and the world we inhabit. Perhaps some might think that that's actually the definition of human intelligence. What do you think about that? Less about what we know, more about how vulnerable we are. So when you look out your window, ask yourself, do you see intelligence or do you see dogma? Do you see a culture listening and working to realign itself with the ever-emerging natural orders as they unfold? Or do you see desperately stubborn efforts by many, particularly those in positions of power, trying to keep everything the same to the detriment of the entire human experiment? You know, like you, I might be only one member of this family that is now 7 billion strong. And like most families, yeah, sometimes it's hard for us to agree. But sometimes things get so bad, we need serious intervention. The following series is that intervention in the hope to salvage what is clearly a culture in decline.
Hello everyone out there, welcome to this edition of TZM Global Radio. I'm your host for today, Jim Phillips, or James Phillips, from the UK chapter of the Zeitgeist Movement, and also coordinator for TZM Education. Sorry for my absence from recent radio shows. I've been rather busy. I'm sure you've all missed me tremendously. I've been rather busy and my recording equipment decided to break. A little bit of planned obsolescence just kicking in there to make sure it tries to drag me down, but I'm not going to let it. So let's get started with some news. The Zeitgeist Media Festival will have just passed this last weekend, and I pre-record my radio shows. So I don't know how it went because this is prior to it, but I hope you had a good time. I hope you supported the media festival, and at least, if not in your local area, you went online and took a look at some of the fantastic acts that are lined up for that this year. Because as I'm sure you're all aware, art is a really important medium by which to reach people, because it's important to do so not just on an intellectual level but an emotional one as well. Human beings aren't just robots. We have feelings and emotions, and they elicit us to do all sorts of things with our life. And if we are truly going to change the cultural zeitgeist out there, then art is a extremely important medium by which to reach people, which is why we have a Zeitgeist Media Festival. So I really hope you enjoyed the festival, however you chose to participate in it. The One Planet project is still kicking on out there, so hope that's all going well for you in your chapters. We've been over the aims of the One Planet project in previous radio shows, but just extremely briefly, the idea is to approach members of the public with some simple questions in order to try to get their email address for our database so that we can widen the membership of the movement and widen our email lists and database in order to promote future Zeitgeist events and future events connected with this train of thought. So if you want to get involved with that, then go to www.oneplanetproject.net. In other news, the new video series Culture in Decline by Peter Joseph has just come out, the first episode being called What Democracy? And you heard an introduction to this series at the beginning of this radio broadcast. Bit of a come down onto my voice after that absolutely wicked riff. You know what? You should just watch this program for nothing other than that riff, which is fucking killer. I nearly headbutted my laptop when that first came on. But yeah, there is more to the show than just the killer riff, obviously. Lovely little sort of comedy moments in there to go along with the excellent presentation that we've come to expect from Peter with regards to the information surrounding this train of thought. And yes, this first episode is called What Democracy? Anybody who's familiar with the train of thought that the Zeitgeist Movement advocates will be well in tune with the idea that we don't really live in a democracy and never really did. Not that it would even be the best system of operation for human beings, because all opinions are in fact not equal. Some are more equal than others with regards to how well informed you are. The more important disposition to have is what the benchmark is with regards to how you arrive at the correct decisions for the management of your global household and the care of the human beings within that household. The Zeitgeist Movement's disposition is that our understanding of the natural world in which we have to inhabit is being constantly updated via our increased understanding of it, and that increased understanding comes from the application of the scientific method, a method which has been used to give us everything that sustains our way of life on this planet, but has never in fact been applied in a direct fashion to our social system and social affairs. We feel that it could be, and that if it were, it would solve many of the root causes of the problems that we face as a species on spaceship Earth today. That's just to sum up our very, very basic disposition on how we may arrive at more appropriate decisions in a resource-based economy. But yes, strongly recommend watching Culture in Decline on YouTube. Although technically not Zeitgeist Movement material, it's very, very much in line with the train of thought and exposes our current political system for what it is, which is basically a facade. As I'm sure people out there are all aware, and if you want a more substantial understanding of that particular viewpoint, then it's probably best to go and check out that first episode of Culture in Decline. So in other news, I've been giving regular presentations now at a pub's function room local to me to try to get this train of thought out to the public in general. This is a really, really easy approach and basically free, folks. So I strongly recommend to do this. If you find a pub with a function room, they might have a projector in there. I'm sure if they're not using that function room on that night in question, they'd be more than happy to let it go out to someone for free so that more punters can come through the door and buy pints. And that's how you can get your foot in the door, so to speak, without actually having to pay for the hire of the room. So this is a great method that we can use to try to pull in new people, and I strongly recommend and encourage all chapters around the world to do this. So yeah, get out there and see what function rooms are available in your local area, guys. Okay, In terms of TZM education news, the long overdue update for the website is nearly there. And included in that update will be brand new materials that have gradually been overhauled to be slightly better and a bit more appropriate for the schools I've been going into. So there'll be an activism section on there, fresh with letter templates and everything you possibly need to try to get in touch with your local schools and get in there and get this message going on with the young people who are much more likely to not only get this train of thought because their minds haven't been so polluted by needing to make a living out of this system and have a vested interest in it, but also because of their age, they're going to be more likely to not only get this train of thought, but also be the ones to have to put it into action in terms of the building of the resource-based economy. So yes, that update is on its way, and hopefully you guys should find that useful. Another project that's been on the back burner for a while is something I'm calling The First Christmas. The background to how this came about is reasonably interesting. Last Christmas I put a post out on my Facebook profile with a video of Santa's little elves. It basically shows all the people around the world in making the useless shit we give each other at Christmas and then throw away in January, as well as a comical video of why Christmas is bullshit, but with the comment of saying, anybody who was going to give me a present for Christmas, please don't bother. Instead, please give the money to a charity of your choice. I don't need anything. I live in paradise. Now, the response I got was very, very interesting, to say the least. Can you guess what I got called by my family and friends? Scrooge. That's right. Bah humbug. Which is a really interesting response when you think about it, because if I was the person at the beginning of the story, that can't be true because I'm saying give the money to charity, so I'm being nice. And if they're calling me the person at the end of the story, it seems like it's almost a pointless thing to say because, well, yes, that's what he did. And so it's obviously meant in a derogatory way, but people don't even understand what they're criticising. What they're in fact criticising is their own bullshit materialistic values that they can't quite square with their conscience. So what they'd rather do is take it out on someone who has the balls to stand up and say, I don't need shit from you bought for me to make me feel better about myself. And they can't stand it because they're still locked into that train of thought. But it occurred to me that maybe that shame that they're eliciting there on that post could be used to help create a better world. I joined the dots between that and the fact that you can put some of these badges on your Facebook profile. Many of the movement members have them. They have, TZM ones or Venus Project ones as badges on their Facebook profiles. It occurred to me that if we had a little logo that signified to your friends and family on Facebook that you would rather they give the money at Christmas that they would have spent on a present for you to a charity of either your choice or their choice, whatever, then that might be a good way to kickstart a gift economy, especially at a time of Christmas, which, although we know it's all about materialistic bullshit, at least in gesture and essence, a lot of people say it shouldn't be. So the idea is to play on that gesture and start a bit of a gift economy idea, specifically through Facebook. So the idea being that if 5 or 10% of a population want to roll with an idea, the rest will follow. So it could have a real snowball effect, but only if we get some numbers on the ground doing it. The idea being that you have a little C with a Christmas hat on top of it or something that hopefully the movement members put up on their profile pictures and send out posts about the idea on their profile, tell their friends and family about it if they want. Basically spread the word of this. If the spread goes large enough, then the rest will follow, and who knows, you kickstart what could be deemed a gift economy, and that's why it's called The First Christmas. Now the obstacle being that obviously this is a huge long shot. Who knows, it might even take a couple of years running to really kick it off. But I am, for someone who loves technology, I'm reasonably technically illiterate, so I need some help. Basically, I need someone who can design the logo so that it looks pretty cool, and someone who knows how to develop one of these apps. Just generally some help on this would be really, really appreciated. So if you like the sound of the idea, guys, then do get in touch with me. You can get in touch through the website, my website that is, at www.tzmeducation.org. And if you go to the contact section, then that will come through to my email address. So any help on this would be greatly appreciated. And hopefully if I get some help, then I'll be able to tell you more about this project in the future. So what have I got lined up for you today on the show? Well, it occurred to me recently that I don't get enough time or hours in the day to actually check out the volume of material that the movement is putting out. Because as time has moved on, there's been more and more people who've become more confident in their knowledge of the train of thought to be able to come to the forefront and give a lecture on a given topic that interests them. And I just don't have the time to check out all of them. And whenever I do, I think, God, that was fantastic. And I think of all the ones that I'm missing out on and that I just don't have time to take a look at on YouTube in the evening. However, I am on the go quite a lot, which means that I am permanently plugged into my iPod. If I'm traveling somewhere or walking my dog or what have you, the iPod is a great way to hit two birds with one stone. So from time to time, what I would like to do with my radio shows is include one of our lectures. Now, I know there'll be some people out there who think that it is doubling up our material or copping out, or whatever it might be. But I would say that, first of all, I'm not going to put on the bigger lectures, if you will, Peter's lectures, Ben's. I'm going to put on some of the ones that we might not know of or might not got round to checking out and might not have time to get round to checking out. To be honest, if you've heard it once, it's no bad thing to hear it again. I have Peter's lectures and some of Ben's and Jacques and various things backed up on my iTunes, and I still go back and listen to them twice. Some of the information is just too dense to suck up in one sitting, to be honest. So, yeah, it's no bad thing to hear them twice and reinforce this information in different ways from different perspectives to get a more broader context on how to communicate this message more effectively and a more in-depth knowledge of the different topics entailed. Because if you think about the array of topics that this train of thought brings about, you've got to be an expert in monetary, financial, economics, human behavior, the sciences, geography, history of culture, politics. While some of these obviously aren't part of what we would like to see come to fruition as a system, they are nonetheless all connected to conveying this message, and questions come up through all of these different avenues and contexts. So the wider your range of knowledge is across these different topics, the easier it will be to convey the overall train of thought and answer in detail the questions that you may get asked. Not to mention the increased confidence in yourself when you have a wider array of knowledge and a wider spectrum of knowledge. So, the first lecture I'd like to include in my show is, by no measure of arrogance, my lecture from Z-Day 2012 in Canada. Let me explain the reasoning behind this so you don't just think I'm going completely up my own arse. I've done a few radio shows now. One included the narrative from my lecture at Z-Day 2011 in London that outlined the purpose of TZM education and some of the educational principles needed to bring about a resource-based economy. I've also done a lecture and a critique on homework, but I feel that the lecture given in Canada on the history of coercive education is an important one to include, as it really outlines how we've arrived at our current educational model, and also gives a little bit more information on some of the ways in which we could bridge out of our current educational paradigm and into a new educational system that could help bring about the train of thought required for a resource-based economy. So anyway, without further ado, here is the history of coercive education and a new educational perspective.
I help coordinate a website called TZM Education. This site's purpose is to help movement members to get the ideas of a resource-based economic model into the education system and to collect the studies and research that validate the educational proposals needed for such a system to come to fruition. Upon coming to the movement, a profound realization hit me when I finally understood our materials. That was the need to influence the educational system at large and the amazing potential this approach could have with regards to the much needed transition into a resource-based economy. The reason for this is twofold. The first is that schools house people with less culturally indoctrinated mindsets that are more willing to take on new ideas. This potential openness a child has towards the notion that they really could radically change the world and make it a better place is not merely to be passed off as simple childish naivety. Children bring new eyes to old problems, and they don't have the same cultural baggage that many adults will have from years of having their aspirations for a better world beaten down. The real problem is, in my view, that many in the adult world have simply forgotten how to view the world through the eyes of a child. Wouldn't the definition of naivety, immaturity, selfishness and irresponsibility be to think that you can have infinite growth on a finite planet? After all, this is what the adult world says makes sense, right? Then we have the audacity to lecture kids on how to behave. It's high time the adult world took a moment to pause and reflect on how they used to view the world when they were a child, and they'll quickly see it for what it is, a playground. And guess what? Playgrounds have to be looked after, otherwise playtime is over. And the second is that the educational system controls society and how it operates. Therefore, it's not really that surprising that most schools in this system are there largely to establish fixed habits of response to authority. They are the engine room for the creation of the mindset needed to fuel the system in which they exist. As I will point out in part one of this presentation, our current system of coercive compulsory education's intrinsic design features reinforce obedience, docility, and act largely as a cookie-cutting plant to pump out an obedient population of work slaves ready for the marketplace. Through the use of coercion to create conformity to the prevailing status quo, the current educational system preserves itself largely by stifling independent, critical thinking skills. This is expected when you understand that culture reflects education and education reflects culture. They have to for the system to function at all. And in part two, we'll take a look at some of the potential educational perspectives that could help bring about the much needed transition into a resource-based economy. Part one, the history of coercive education. In pre-literate societies, education was achieved orally and through observation and imitation. The young learned informally from their parents, extended family and grandparents. And at the later stages of life, they received instruction of a more formal nature imparted by people not necessarily related in the context of initiation, religion, or ritual. With the development of the reading and writing and eventually the printing press, it became possible for stories, poetry, knowledge, beliefs, and customs to be recorded and passed on to future generations and a wider social demographic. And thus began one of the first major repressions of education, the restriction in the teaching of literacy. For hundreds of years, reading and writing was kept as the privilege of the privileged across nearly all human cultures. The power establishment of monarchs, church and state realized that knowledge was a dangerous liberty to afford the masses under their control, and so they restricted its teachings to the upper echelons of society in order to help preserve their position of dominance in their given culture. Take the example of William Tyndale. He was the first to translate considerable parts of the Bible into English from the direct translation of the Hebrew and Greek texts, and the first to take advantage of the new medium of print, which allowed for its wide distribution. Was he to be thanked for the spreading of the Holy Scripture to the common man by the church leaders of his day? No. This was taken to be a direct challenge to the hegemony of the Roman Catholic Church and a combination of this defiance against the ruling cardinals and his opposition to King Henry VIII's divorce from his then wife Catherine of Aragon at the time on the grounds of it being unscriptural led to him being tried for heresy, choked, impaled and burnt at the stake. So whilst Plato's Republic is widely credited with popularizing the concept of compulsory education in Western intellectual thought, it was not until the time of Martin Luther and the Reformation in 16th century Europe that the first compulsory systems of education were set up. The aims of this were, in the words of John Knox, a leading Protestant clergyman at the time, to instill the virtuous education and godly upbringing in the youth of the realm. This was an early sign of the recognition on the part of a given culture's elite to educate the children of that society towards preserving their interests. From here, the journey to the importance we now place on a universal compulsory education for all has been arrived at through a variety of different twists and turns in cultures around the world, ranging from the desire of the church to permeate society with its teachings, to the economic demand for apprentices in varying industries and professions. The current system of state-prescribed education up to 16 years of age is actually a rather recent development, with many of our current educational approaches being born out of the economic, technological, and philosophical era of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Due to the advocation of the absence of government involvement in the running and regulating of the capitalist structure of the day, there were little or no regulations imposed upon factory policies. This allowed the wealthy upper and middle class owners to pursue whichever path was most profitable for them, regardless of the well-being of their workers. Since workers, especially women and children, were labouring for anything up to 18 hours a day, there was very little family contact. As a result, children received very limited education, had stunted growth, and were sickly. Families often lived in slums. With little sanitation, infant mortality skyrocketed, and during the early Industrial Revolution, 50% of infants died before the age of 2. Naturally, this caused a rise in attacks, both physical, political, verbal, and cultural, against the ruling political and capitalist class structure of the day. These acts, passed in 18th and 19th century England, show a clear trend towards the rise in the living and working standards of the masses, and eventually the implementation of a state-sponsored education system. It should therefore be no surprise that the educational system that arose from this era reflected a factory-style approach towards learning. The Enlightenment view of reductionism, siphoned through the early ideals of early free-market capitalism, saw humans as objects that needed to be controlled, just like the resources used for production. The educational model that has perhaps impacted modern Western schooling more than any other is that of the Prussian Empire of the early 19th century. So let's take a quick look at how this came about and what its ruling principles were. The Kingdom of Prussia decided upon their defeat to Napoleon in the Battle of Jena in 1806 that the principal reason for their defeat in the battlefield was the fact that their soldiers were thinking for themselves rather than following orders. Their solution was the implementation of a free state-prescribed 8-year compulsory educational curriculum for all children. The purpose of this system was not only to provide the skills of reading and writing and arithmetic for the purpose of the early industrialized world, but also the need for duty, discipline, respect for authority, and the ability to follow orders. The Prussian system was designed to instill social obedience in its citizens through indoctrination. Every individual had to become convinced in the core of their being that the king was just, always right, and the need for obedience to his rule paramount. As the German philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte, who was a key influence in the implementation of this system, once said, "If you want to influence the student at all, you must do more than merely talk to him. You must fashion him, and fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will otherwise than what you wish him to will." An important part of the design of this system was for the state to prescribe what was to be learnt, when it was to be learnt, and how long to think about it. This educational system is widely renowned for the eventual rise of neo-Nazism. Couple this model in with the illusion of choice given by the concept of democracy, and it's and it's easy to see why we have such a docile, obedient, and subservient population today. Progress has indeed been made from the days of the cane and dunce's cap, but nonetheless a model of state-enforced education based on working hard rather than thinking hard is still in operation structurally. It's largely based on rote learning and the memorization of facts in exchange for rewards and punishment for the dissenting pupils in the ranks if the subscribed subject matter is not adhered to. Critical thinking, problem solving, and independent thought cannot be allowed to enter its metric of value. This point is well made by author and teacher John Taylor Gatto in the book Dumbing Us Down. The very stability of our economy is threatened by any form of education that might change the nature of the human product that schools now turn out. The economy school children now live under and serve would not survive a generation of young people trained, for example, to critically think. People who are confident, independent, self-assured, and critically analytical don't make very good consumers, I'm afraid. So the first value orientation that's reinforced in our system is that of materialism. Many studies now show what we've long intuitively suspected. That is that past a certain point, material wealth and acquisition do not add up to us being happier. People focus more on materialistic pursuits when they feel insecure, inadequate, fearful, and anxious. Keep this in mind when we run down the design features of our current educational model, as I will point out that these tendencies are built into its design intrinsically. People actually think that they must buy things they don't need to make impressions that won't last onto people they don't know in an attempt to secure their position of worth in society. Materialism is therefore a rather easy value system to attack, and many will readily admit that it's a foolish value orientation, but they still go out and buy things they don't need out of a culturally reinforced obligation to the prevailing status quo, as well as the obvious and futile attempt to try and fill an emotional need with a temporary materialistic one. Unfortunately, this void goes unrecognized with the missing components needed to fill it. These being personal purpose, self-realization, self-esteem, belonging, and positive family and communal bonds, none of which come free with your next purchase, I'm afraid. But this is the mind lock that people are stuck in. It defines their belief system through its reinforcement through their culture, and so in turn their worth as a person, despite how despotic it is. Anyone who challenges this precept is ostracized from the herd and marked as a potential threat. It's the same as labeling someone a conspiracy theorist. No need to look at the information objectively, just go with the mainstream view and what authority figures tell you, because after all, why would anybody in authority lie to you? Right? Well, because put simply, that's what they'll do in order to preserve their interests, if necessary. And this is what's being done through the current antiquated design of the school system. For example, it's said that the system is there to promote a love of learning, but upon closer inspection, it's clear to see that this is a fallacy. True learning is self-directed, meaning that it's pursued because it's something the student wants to learn intrinsically through intrigue, not due to the extrinsic motivating factors such as arbitrary grades and test scores. If it's a love of learning you are trying to foster in the young, then this system is the antithesis of that aim. The 7 main design features of the coercive educational model are pointed out again in the book Dumbing Us Down. They are confusion, class position, indifference, emotional dependency, intellectual dependency, conditional self-esteem, and surveillance. So, let's go through these attributes briefly, starting with point number 1, confusion. Yes, it was a confusing time, wasn't it? This is instilled through the seemingly unrelated relationship of subjects to each other and the natural world. This is why the question, why will memorizing this information be useful to me later on in life, is so often asked by pupils in school. The real answer is that in a streamlined job market, it probably won't be. School is about completing tasks on time and to the required standard set out by those in command, just like the world of work. Point 2, class position. This is imposed through merits, demerits, grades, praise and punishment to divide and rule the class. Divide and rule. Where have I heard that before? Anyway, the lower the grade, the more contempt there is for the person from his peers and parents and authority figures. The competitive classroom model brings the conditioning process of the world of work into play by reinforcing the notion that you must climb upon others in order to receive reward from authoritarian figures, and this is achieved by pleasing those in that position of authority. Point 3, indifference. Indifference is another needed attribute of this educational system. You must show your enthusiasm for a given topic and respond in the subscribed way for authoritarian favour, even if you find the subject and the way it's being taught uninspiring and dull. This is perfect for the world of work because even if you hate your job, you still need to pretend that it's the best and most amazing thing that's ever happened to you. Who knows, if you're a really good boy or girl and show us how interested you are in the meaningless, boring and most likely pointless tasks set out for you, then we may just give you some more debt slip tokens in next month's goodie bag, or a nice little more title in front of your name. Lucky you. Another way of instilling this attribute of indifference is by the ringing of bells. This is a classic operant conditioning technique, signifying a break in concentration of the student. It promotes the subconscious idea that no task is worth thinking too deeply about, and that when the boss says it's time to move along to the next workstation, well, it's time to move along to the next workstation. Like the memory hole in 1984, the ringing of bells serves to destroy both past and future, making every interval of time just like the last, helping to reinforce a state of permanence in the very fabric of the reality prescribed by Big Brother. Point 4. Emotional dependency. Through the mechanism of punishment and reward, it's easy to make sure that self-esteem is dependent upon whether that person in the position of authority says you can feel that way about your actions. It's easy to see how this one-size-fits-all educational system is not designed to do anything other than reinforce uniformity and obedience to the prevailing status quo. Point 5. Intellectual dependency. Good students wait for the teacher to tell them what the truth is. The prescribed curriculum is all that's relevant, so we must wait for those in the positions of authority who possess the relevant knowledge and information to deliver it to us on a spoon. Deviation onto a chosen path of interest is prohibited. Point 6. Conditional self-esteem. People must be told what they are worth by those in the know. They are allowed to feel good about themselves when they are told they can. This is further perpetuated by the imposition of grades and mandatory standardized test scores being sent home so that the shame and pride aspect can be reinforced yet again by more authoritarian figures in the form of a child's parents. The system, as pointed out earlier, could simply not take an influx of self-evaluating, confident, objective, critically thinking and emotionally stable people. And finally, point 7, surveillance. Lack of privacy is another necessary attribute to reinforce in a system of dictatorial control. Class changeover lasts close to 300 seconds to limit promiscuous fraternization. Children are encouraged to snitch on each other so that Big Brother can remain informed of the behavior of its minions at all times. Of course, the domineering force of the state can't end at home time. It must be continued on with a second shift in the evening called homework. Heaven forbid that simple family time or an individually led-based learning process free from state command and control should take place. And just in case you do get any funny ideas, then we have television, with its corporate-owned advertising agenda to perpetuate the values, emotions, and set patterns of behavior required for the mindless obedience and consumption awaiting you in adult life. It's important to note that there are many well-intentioned and good teachers out there. Many of them feel the same way about this system, and they are often under immense pressure to turn out good results. So in some ways, it's simply astonishing that there are any good-natured, fun, inspiring, and vibrant teachers out there at all. Unfortunately for them, it's like trying to pedal a bike uphill with no wheels. The structure itself is flawed. So what do we do about this despotic educational design? How will we change it, and what will our new educational imperatives be? In part 2, we'll look briefly at the educational perspectives needed for a resource-based economy. This is laid out very concisely in the book The Best That Money Can't Buy by Jacques Fresco. A must-read for anyone who wishes to understand the resource-based economy and how it works. The more intelligent our children, the better our lives and the richer our culture will be. Every child using drugs and living a life without direction and purpose is damaged life that we will have to pay for in the future. It is our children who will inherit the future. With the proper information and nurturing, they will understand that Earth is a fantastic place capable of providing more than enough for the needs of everyone. The attributes of this educational model for a resource-based economy are then outlined in the same chapter, some of which are working towards regarding the world's resources as a common heritage, transcending the artificial boundaries that separate people, outgrowing political governance as a means of social management, utilizing the highest quality products for the benefit of the world's people whilst eliminating planned obsolescence, encouraging the widest range of creativity and incentive towards constructive endeavours, arriving at methodologies through careful research rather than random opinions, and providing not only the necessities of life, but also the challenges that stimulate the mind whilst emphasising individuality rather than uniformity. Some of these points could well sound strange and be taken out of context without a detailed understanding of what a resource-based economy is, so I'd encourage you to take a look at these in greater detail if needs be. It's worth noting, however, that no one will be forced to accept this system. You either see the merits and potentials of such a direction and constructively apply yourself towards promoting the underlying understanding of the synergistic relationship between ourselves, our surrounding environment, and the need to solve the root causes of problems in an objective manner, or you don't. Using force does not change perceptions, proof does. For these 19 attributes in such an educational perspective to come to fruition, people must understand the merits of collaboration, empathy, learning, and the need for the alignment of ourselves and our social system towards the needs, to our needs, rather, and the emergent nature of reality, or I'm afraid we are simply setting the stage for our own destruction. It's imperative to understand that it's a train of thought that leads to all manifestations of human structures, ideals, understandings, beliefs, and behaviour. Therefore, comprehending and cultivating the educational imperatives and values required for this train of thought is itself the system's integrity. Without this, quite simply, there is no resource-based economy. If children are encouraged to question illegitimate authority, be inquisitive, and go beyond previous social contrivances and conventions, then they can and they will. The educational environment does not simply end when you leave school. The human brain is constantly receiving information and filtering it to help us understand the surrounding environment and the required interaction needed for our prosperity and survival within it. It's what makes us so adaptable to changing circumstances. The environment must reinforce the behaviour and practice of operations you would like to see in every sense of the word. I'm afraid that you cannot have a competitive, scarcity-preserving, profit-based system of operation for your survival and then try to teach children to go out into the world and be nice and share. The two are diametrically opposed. In an emergent society, a new cultural perspective will be needed to be reinforced that will require our children to push the boundaries of convention and overcome our failings, not perpetuate them. This is why, through approaching the school system directly, that we as a movement can effect the necessary change. There are many interesting and creative ways of doing this. You could play collaborative games and sustainable thought exercises for the younger age ranges. You could present new and more efficient technologies such as hydroponics, maglev trains, systems, nanotech, and alike that will help to open slightly older minds to the marvellous and unlimited potential the future could hold. Or you could talk at higher school levels and universities about a resource-based economic model explicitly. This is one of the principal aims of TZM education, to share and provide ideas and materials in order to help members to go into educational institutions and talk about these ideas with students, parents, and teachers. Best of all, we're not alone. There are many forward-thinking models of education adopting new approaches towards learning now. Whilst these educational systems are not entirely those of a resource-based economy, some, including Rudolf Steiner schools, the democratic school system, homeschooling, the Montessori school, and even whole countries like Finland are heading in the right direction. Whether it's science, maths, or reading, Finland regularly comes out on top in all internationally comparative tests and has no failing schools. Importantly, it also scores highly in levels of child happiness too. Does it do this by a draconian, top-down, authoritarian management of education? No, quite the opposite actually. Children start school later at the age of 7 to build excitement and strong familial bonds. The school day is broken up with far more regular intervals for unmonitored play, helping to build trust between the teachers and children. Teachers are held in the highest regard and they are highly educated. There are often 3 teachers to a class in order to help struggling children. Teachers are called by their first names and they stay with the children from ages 7 to 13, helping to build an understanding and relationship with the child and their parents. Class learning is a collaborative effort rather than a competitive one, and the same is true between schools as there are no school league tables in Finland. Because Finland has no failing schools, there are subsequently very few private schools, and any that do exist are state-funded. There are very few tests, instead choosing to base academic ability on assessment, and there is virtually no homework, and they are better for it. The fact that we may find this surprising only goes to show how far adrift we are in our current understanding of how to foster a true intrinsic love of learning in a child. I expand upon this point in greater detail in last year's TZM Education presentation in London, so I'd encourage you to go to the site and give it a watch, but needless to say that learning is not something that needs to be forced, but instead it needs to be made interesting, fun, and focused on the positive development and needs of the child. In turn helping them to become happy, empathic, critically thinking, thriving members of society. As has been stated in our materials before, personal interest must become social interest if we expect to survive in any meaningful way as a species on spaceship Earth. In this sense, people would become the currency. The next person you meet in a resource-based economy could be a member of a team for research into new medicine, transport systems, or food distribution. To hurt them would be quite literally to hurt yourself. In our current system, the parallel would be to take a $20 bill like this and tear it in half. The reason you don't see that happen is because there's no reinforcement for it. The artificial monetary sequence of value is what is reinforced in our culture today, not people, and that simply has to change. The emergent nature of reality, common good for your fellow man, empathy, and the pursuit of knowledge for the betterment of humankind is the value set that must be promoted to encourage our young people to truly be the light of change they wish to see in the world. If we do nothing, nothing will happen. Don't let people tell you that you're a fool for wanting to change the world for the better. All you will do here with your brief time on this planet is change things, whether you like it or not. What you change and to what extent you change it is contingent upon your actions, not someone else's. For example, if every member of the movement went to just one school and spoke to 100 kids, then we could reach approximately 50 million young adults about to enter this system. We can do it. We're not small. We're not powerless. Don't believe the hype. Because quite frankly, this is not the best we can do. And I, for one, will not stand for it. I will not allow my children to grow up in a world that thinks that a system that lets billions starve whilst a few prosper is the best we can do. For a species that's capable of so much, we are failing in all the areas it really matters the most, and for no other reason than an outdated game we created thousands of years ago called money. I vow that as long as there is air left in my lungs and blood running through my veins, that I will not stand by and watch whilst millions of mirror images of myself continue to suffer and die needlessly for nothing other than the false adulation of meaningless pieces of paper like this. It only has the value that we place in it, and I, for one, personally think that this shit has got to go.
I hope you enjoyed that, guys. At the end of that presentation, I proceeded to tear up the $20 bill that I had used as an example. Unfortunately, that $20 bill has Andrew Jackson's face on it, which is a slap in the face if ever I saw one, considering he was one of the ones that wanted to get rid of a privately controlled banking system, creating the currency of the nation. But, you know, it's the poetic gesture that's the most important thing. The next thing I'd like to talk about is an ebook that has been released by a movement member who goes by the name Jas Garcher. And he has written a book called The First Civilization, which is a free PDF to download online. This was a really, really great book. The thing I most enjoyed about it was the way it was written. It had comedic moments in it. The wording wasn't very, weighty. It wasn't very involved. It just spelled it out really simply. It was a really easy read to just breeze through. So what I'd like to also do with my radio shows is just complement them with the reading out of a chapter from this book each radio show, because I think it's fantastic. It lays out the train of thought really, really well. So I suppose that my aim here is to create an audiobook, but I think that it's a well worthwhile thing to include. And by all means, if you pull up the PDF file online, you can read along with James. But I hope you enjoy it, guys. So I'm going to start by reading out the prologue to the book now. It starts off with a quote I'm sure we're all familiar with from Buckminster Fuller. Quote, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Close quote. So, the first civilization, prologue. There is a certain model that pervades virtually every aspect of our lives. It affects the way humans behave and interact with each other, determines which humans wear diamonds on their fingers and which ones dig for diamonds in the dirt, and even plays a strong hand in determining who lives and who dies. The model I speak of is human society. Our political, economic and social systems combine to create a very peculiar model for our global society. In our current model, it's possible for one continent to face an obesity epidemic while another continent faces mass starvation. Resources that could be used to improve human lives and alleviate suffering are instead turned into weapons with which to end human lives and encourage suffering. A highly adaptable and intelligent species capable of mastering complex technologies and surviving in virtually any environment has become its own greatest threat to survival. Our global society seems to be a fantastic model for inefficiency, needless destruction, and the complete absence of logic and reason. In keeping with the advice of Mr. Fuller, the purpose of this book is to display to the world a new potential model for human society. In this new model, we take full advantage of our scientific and technical prowess to free humans from mundane labour tasks and create an abundance of goods and services. We rid ourselves of obsolete constructs such as money, national borders, governments, and all other forms of oppressive control. This is a system that recognises the inescapable interconnection of every organism on the planet and sees that the suffering of one human invariably leads to the suffering of other humans and the deterioration of society as a whole. And finally, this is a system in which actions are determined not by the amount of shiny coins that must be arbitrarily traded for their completion, but by the availability of the Earth's resources. This model is called a resource-based economy, or RBE for short. An RBE is a system unlike any socio-economic system that has been employed in history, in that it was not designed by consulting traditional beliefs or ancient philosophies. Instead, this model was conceived by using the most powerful tool in the history of human thought, science. In this system, we attempt to address the problems facing society by considering evidence and making choices based on logic and scientifically supported ideas. Using scientific thought, we can treat society's problems as technical issues to be solved the same way that we troubleshoot a malfunctioning computer or attempt to repair a car. If an idea conflicts with the evidence, it must be re-evaluated and revised to be in better accord with reality. Unfortunately, contemporary society has in a depressingly large number of ways completely separated itself from reality, so as you read this book, you will almost certainly come across claims and theories that seem to spit in the face of common sense, but which are actually backed up by our scientific understanding. Not surprisingly, we'll start things off with a quick science lesson. This book begins with an introductory chapter on human behaviour and the way the environment in which we live and grow has a profound effect on our development. It is of critical importance that we understand this concept before delving into the details of an RBE, since many of the ideas we'll encounter on our journey seem counterintuitive and contrary to common experience. Having an understanding of the link between our behaviour and the environment will therefore prevent a lot of unnecessary confusion. One could easily write an entire book on this subject, but for our purposes, I will simply highlight a few examples and behaviours that are particularly important to address. Once we are equipped with this basic knowledge, we'll head into the main body of the book. At this point, you'll also understand why I've chosen the title, The First Civilization. Section 1 is a thorough, in-depth look at the potential configuration for a resource-based economy. We'll discuss the specific technologies that could be used to make such a system possible and how they would be utilised for our benefit. We'll also talk about the ins and outs of managing a system without money, governments, or any other form of coercive control. The main point of this section is to provide you with a solid understanding of how this kind of system might work. That being said, you'll probably find yourself with more questions than answers. This is where Section 2 comes in. In this section, we'll go over questions, concerns, objections and complaints that have been brought up in response to the RBE idea. Specifically, we'll go over issues as how to deal with unlimited human wants, fears of a new world order, the economic calculation problem, issues relating to artificial intelligence, comparisons to socialism, overpopulation and many others. By doing so, we'll further see the logical strength of this theoretical system. Of course, we must keep in mind at all times that this system is, as of right now, still entirely theoretical. No matter how much evidence and logic we have in favour of this idea, it ultimately does us little good unless the idea can be thoroughly tested and its merits can be observed and measured. Enter Section 3. Here we will go through an example of a step-by-step protocol that could be used to test an RBE. In keeping with our general theme of scientific thought, this plan takes the form of a series of scientific experiments. In addition to providing us with a way to test the RBE concept, it would also serve as a very interesting experiment in human behaviour and health. We could learn just how much of a negative impact our current system is having on the physical and mental health of our species. The primary purpose of this plan is to create an example community that is based upon the principles of an RBE and use this as a platform to push for further, ideally global, implementation of this new system. As you read this book, keep in mind that my purpose is not to create an absolute, immutable instruction manual for this system, or to make any absolute claims about what the future should look like. Rather, I simply wish to provide one possible example of what the future could look like. My goal is to show that a system as seemingly fantastic and idealistic as an RBE is not only technically possible, but is fully within our grasp to create, and would have a high probability of success. In addition, I fully expect that every specific idea I put forth in this book will eventually be superseded by better ideas and superior technologies. In fact, I sincerely hope that this will occur. The quality that truly separates science from all other methods of thought is that science accepts nothing as an absolute truth. Ideas continually evolve and improve, so you should expect that even as you are reading this book, many of the specific technologies I mention will have already been rendered obsolete. But worry not, for the specifics are not nearly as critical to the success of our species as the general understandings we will gain from this thought experiment. One final point I will mention before we begin our trip is this. Question every word that I say in this book. After all, I'm literally just some random guy and there's absolutely no reason you have to believe a single thing that I say. For that reason, I've filled this book with references to other works by experts in their fields, and I've applied my own logic and reasoning to the ideas and concepts in these works in order to give you a comprehensive argument for an RBE. I would encourage you to employ your own sense of logic as you read on to ensure that the evidence I offer and the logic I use is actually sound. I didn't write this book to give you answers, but to give you new questions to contemplate. Let's begin, shall we? And I'll pause there because the next thing will be introduction and human behaviour. But I really love the way that ends. And in fact, it's the way I start all of my presentations. I basically start by saying don't believe a word I say, but also don't assume that this is something it isn't. And I think that's a nice way to start. It's not dogmatic, it's not based on a belief system or someone's random opinion. Straight away you're putting up the idea that you could be completely wrong in everything you say, which actually I think is probably quite relieving for most people, because they're used to advertising people standing up and saying, oh, this product's going to be the best for you, and this preacher standing up and saying that this is the only book that you need to read to understand reality. and parents and teachers who deliver the truth to you on a spoon rather than reinforce the idea that it's important to think critically for yourself. And later on in life, the more you tend to see these people be wrong about their assertions and their beliefs and their opinions, the more you start to realise that humans are flawed and very often wrong. We've constantly updated our information over the past, and actually it's a good thing to be wrong. No one really says that it's good to think you're right when you're actually wrong. It's just that it's hard for most people to have to admit it, because let's face it, you live in a system where admitting when you're wrong could land you losing your livelihood. So it's pretty serious. So we should never really be too surprised when people have trouble admitting they're wrong. Very often people say to me, oh, you've got strong opinions or strong beliefs, and actually I try to correct them in saying, I know this seems like that because I'm passionate about what I do, but ironically, I have a lack of belief and a lack of opinion, and all I'm saying is that maybe everything you believe isn't true either. And I think Peter made that point very well in the introduction to today's show and the introduction to the first episode of Culture in Decline, when he said, the reason I don't respect your beliefs is because I don't particularly respect my own, because you realise that what you believe today may not be relevant tomorrow. So actually, what we're trumpeting from the rooftops is the fact that we're not perfect, our judgments aren't perfect, and maybe we should have a mode of decision making that's absent from our weaknesses and that's better at informing us about the actual state of reality. Maybe that's a good disposition to have. It certainly seems to be when you look around you, doesn't it? You've got a house with running water and lights and cars and roads and planes, and what did all these come from? They came from a greater degree of understanding of reality and a more accurate measurement of that reality, and the use of tools in an integrated fashion and an objective way. In other words, the application of technology. Why the hell wouldn't you use the method that gave you all these things that sustains your way of life for orientating your social system? I personally can't conceive of a better mode of operation on this planet we all share than to use our technology and the best decision-making method that we have ever come across as a species for our own collective concern, rather than the private interests of a few people who are locked into a system that's based on the rules of death monopoly. And with that, I will bid you farewell. Until next time.
Be excellent to each other.